Because when we look at a lot of different entrepreneurs, they really kind of put themselves in a box. To chose very clearly to not put yourself in a box and to allow the different cells in you to be very visible. Would you go back to think what were the triggers? What made you say no? It has to be my whole self in some sense to be out there.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the World of Work podcast, to the Wow. My guest speaker today, Mona Amin, is actually my host and I'm the guest. That's right, we decided to change things around a little bit as she was genuinely interested to hear more about how I transformed my world of work. What were those trigger points that made me change so radically the way I see work and to change so radically my professional life? So I hope you enjoyed the session. For sure I did, and I do thank Mona upfront for having been such a wonderful, wonderful host on the show.
Coming to this moment when you said, I want to do something different and what this something different would look like, I think I would be so much interested in your journey of how you transitioned from this place where you were really one of these strong women, strong, successful HR leaders, to this moment where you are now something completely different. You're enjoying it thoroughly and managing these three different facets of your business. That's the question.
It's a pleasure to be on your show. on the other side of the microphone. It's always easier to ask the questions, isn't it, than to answer them. That's a loaded question in the sense, I wish there was like a magic formula to say, well, this happened and then this was the process and then this is the thinking I went through and so on and so forth. I think the only way I can make sense of it is if I look back and I kind of try to rationalize it into some sort of process, even though ultimately it isn't, But I think you're right. It was a very, very difficult decision in a way because, as you know, we've been colleagues. So I thoroughly enjoy what I do in HR. I thoroughly enjoy the people business. I enjoy working in multinational setups. I enjoy the whole people side of the business and working with leaders and so on and so forth. So, and it has been my identity for over 25 years, isn't it? Right? Work is also defines who we are to a great extent. And so it was a little bit like, how do you, and why would you even, transition and move away? And quite a few people around me were actually asking me, why are you doing this? There's no rational reason. There's no real reason that would trigger it. But if I think back and try to make some logic out of it, I think there are a couple of things that happen. First of all, as I was mentioning, it's like really enjoying what you're doing because it's kind of like part of, you believe in it. Yes. And I had reached a point where I realized that I was no longer enjoying it as much as I used to. I was no longer enjoying, especially in the healthcare sector, right, where you and I met. It was kind of like an eye-opener for me. Like for me, HR was 80% building capabilities in the past and 20% perhaps restructuring. And in the healthcare, it was exactly the other way around. It was like you're 80% of the time you're either restructuring because of M&As or, being spun off or divesting or being bought. And only 20% of actually building. Like every other year, I felt we were going through this excruciating exercise of, what's the best design for the organization and closing offices or relocating people or, like R&D facilities moving from Boston to Switzerland and back from Switzerland to Boston. And that was just taxing after a while. And it no longer fit my sense of identity, what HR was supposed to be. So that kind of helped to say, is this really what I want to continue to do? And as an HR professional, can I really, truly stand up in front of we've talked about this many times, in a town hall and tell people, hey, we're going to be building the best culture ever, and we're going to be doing lots of ramping up of capabilities and resources, and 10 months down the road, same town hall, very different message. Right. So I don't know if that resonates with you, but it comes a point where I kind of felt, no, this is no longer the HR that I enjoy doing. And I don't want to put my professionalism like out there in terms of saying, oh, wait a second, but just 6 months ago you were saying something completely different to what is actually happening. So I think that was a big component of it. And then I just felt like time ticks and it's moving very quickly. And so if it took me 25 years to get to where I got, it's probably going to take me another 25 years to get to where I want to go. And if I make the calculations, that's, I'm not even sure I'm going to get there. So I reached the point where I was like, okay, it's either now or it's just not going to happen. And when I say either now, like rightfully you may say, well, to do what? That was a big question mark for me. I didn't necessarily know, like in my mind, already like clear. There are some people who are very clear in their plans. They say, okay, I'm going to leave the corporate path. I'm going to take an entrepreneurial path. And this is exactly what I'm going to do. Well, that wasn't my case. I just knew I wanted to leave the corporate path and to pursue a different path that was probably that would allow my creative self greater space of expression, which, in corporations, when you reach certain levels, that's not always necessarily the case. So I kind of felt I had to give voice to my creative side, which was kind of like that little voice inside of me saying, well, you've been a bit too long now in this corporate environment. It's time to perhaps spread your wings and let the creative side express itself publicly as opposed to privately. I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying, but it's kind of like this combination of these two things,
Absolutely, it does. And I remember the time when we were talking about, what is the one thing you do not know about the person when we were still working together in the corporate, and we got to know that you have music albums, and I was wondering how can someone who has this crazy job also have a music album. And it was great to see you build another music album after you took your break and you really got into that space in a different sense, and you kind of blended that part of your of who you are with your work. And for me it was fascinating to see this blend between the creative you and the one that we knew, the professional you, if I can put it like that, right? So that blend was just awesome to see. And how did again, as you mentioned, you didn't plan it, but what were the triggers for you to, you know, come up to this point and say, okay, it's not this, I know what I'm going to do, but also to allow all different facets of your identity to be clearly visible. Because when we look at a lot of different entrepreneurs, they really kind of put themselves in a box. You chose very clearly to not put yourself in a box and to allow the different selves in you to be very visible. Would you go back to think what were the triggers? What made you say, no, it has to be my whole self in some sense to be out there?
The triggers, once again, that was very much of a back and forth with people as well who were supporting me in this, let's say, entrepreneurial journey, right? So some of them were saying, look, you have to bank on your experience, right? So focus the business on an area that you've been doing for the past 25 years, like focus it on the people side of the business. Don't mix the music because it confuses people and it's a different audience. And I'm like, but the whole purpose for me to create something different is so that I can allow myself to express the different parts of me in a professional way. without necessarily mixing them, blending them, because they are different spaces, if you will, right? Because there are also potentially different audiences, different ways of expressing, manifesting. You know, I'm not here with a guitar and singing in front of you or stuff like that. Or when I do concerts, I don't necessarily talk about talent management and all these wonderful things. Um, but I just felt the whole reason why I'm doing this is, first of all, for myself, like really to say, I am more than my business card. I am more than a box in a hierarchy, and I am more than a job, right? And I want to be able to express that through these different channels. And secondly, ultimately, it's to show people that it can be done, maybe not as drastically as the way I did it, because it has consequences, right? You know, I'm the last person. Some people tell me, oh, but you keep telling people to follow their dreams and their passions. Like, that's not true. I do tell people to be extremely mindful of the decisions they take and only to follow certain inclinations, passions, dreams, etc. Number one, if they're talented at it, like if you ask me to be a chef, probably not, unless you want people to run away from the restaurants, and if they can afford it for a certain period of time, at least until their ideas can come to as well some sort of economic fruition, right? Because otherwise you keep it as a hobby. So with this back and forth, that's why it's taken me 3 years to actually incorporate and create the company, right? Because I wanted to allow myself that time, that space. I wanted to do, it was actually my third album that I did, not the second. My third album in 2020 in the middle of the COVID, blah, blah, blah. And then, as you know, created the podcast completely out of the blue, not expecting it, but that was also a COVID driven type of thing. Remember the first season, yes, like with you and a group of wonderful HR ladies, we got together and said, how can we be helpful in this moment of crisis? And if people lose their jobs, they lost their jobs, right? We did like these amazing episodes to help people. It was almost like an outplacement or a coaching exercise, right? How do you place yourself in the market? You know, your digital identity, how do you manage change, transitions, networking, right? So we did all that, but that was completely not planned. So I'm now reaching a point where I feel that I can show up differently professionally in the music and in the people business, hence the creative businesses, because also I'm doing other things like podcasts, etc. But I'm not still 100% comfortable in that, you know. I've had, you know, this interim assignment as a CHRO, and it was so hysterical how in many cases people had seen my public profile and they actually thought I'm a singer. You know, and I'm like, oh my God, I've been for 25 years an HR professional, and now just because there are a couple of videos of me with a guitar, you know, people say, oh my God, what's a singer doing here? Kind of thing. It wasn't like that, but it was an interesting transition to see, not only for myself to, let's say, transition into these different entrepreneurial paths, but for people to accept you as well as with different sides of professionalism. And it goes both ways, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the blend is enormous, but it's also two completely different ends. You know, we don't necessarily link, someone who is a musician to also become, a successful HR professional in the typical corporate ladder versus the other way around as well. So I, I'd like to dive a little bit into some of the facets that you mentioned. So uh, I'd like you to break it down into the actions that you would have taken to make a switch from your corporate journey to this place, but also go through the emotions and what you touched upon, which is the finances. Because it's not, if someone else wants to again come to this phase of can I be myself, tomorrow morning I want to make this switch, what does it really take in terms of what you need to do, in terms of your actions? What you need to be prepared through the emotional journey that it's going to take. Of course, everybody will have a different one, but what was your experience through that? And what are the quick, tips, checklist items when it comes to managing finances? Because these, for me, the way I see it is these are three different but main elements to which anchor, your career transition in some sense.
I should have taken notes of all those questions, right?
We'll go one by one.
Yeah, and also because let me go back, you said something that struck me that I want to make sure it's kind of it's correct. You said something like the trigger points to be who you are kind of thing. I just want to make it clear that the HR job for me was always who I was as well, so it was more reaching a point where the environment around it, and that's why I came up with this whole idea now of the world of work as spaces, as literally space and time. You're a physicist, right? So this concept of space, we tend to forget it, but it struck me so much. I was looking back in my professional career, 25 years, and I literally started looking at different spaces I've been occupying, not jobs, but the spaces, the environment, the places, 15 job stops, 3 sectors, right? 12 different geographic locations. Each one had its own particular magic to it, or sometimes not. But in each one, I had to feel that I was being who I am, to your point, right? And to a great extent that did happen. So it's not as if I have been pretending, for 25 years to be someone that I'm not. So I guess that's the only, because then you would be a very unhappy person for 25 years. And that's, and to people who are listening, it's, if that is the case, I have an ad now on LinkedIn, which has this beautiful dog on it and a wig, pretending to be somebody else. And it kind of says, don't fake it. You're not going to make it. The only thing you're going to do is you're going to break yourself. So if people feel that they're tight, that they're in a straitjacket, whatever space they're in, then I strongly recommend them to, take a move. So that transition was perhaps even more difficult exactly because of that, because of the privileges as well that you get in a certain space, right? The perks, the money, the status. Let's not underestimate that. Let's be honest with ourselves, the status that you get, the recognition, the travel, all those wonderful things. So anyway, so I just wanted to clarify that point about still being true to who you are. But in my case, it was finding different ways of expressing it beyond HR and beyond a corporate space. So a lot of what I still do is, if you will, HR job, but outside of the corporate space. I've created the my own spaces, but now I can rationalize about it. Back then, I had no clue what I was doing. I only knew so I'm happy to unpack your other questions. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that.
It's good because, again, we sometimes tend to anecdotally, but also just kind of make ourselves feel that it was miserable there, and hence it's happier here. But that's not the case, because you can be happy here and still make a decision to widen your space of happiness with other things that associate with your life, right?
Yes.
No, thank you.
I think the lady, what's her name? I don't remember her name, but guys, check it out. The Grit book. Grit, having grit and all that. She talks about that often, which is leave on a high, never leave really on a low. So if because when you're on a low, you may really take the wrong decisions. And when people are in a crisis mode, they usually go for survival first. And I think one needs to be really in a pondering position. So it's been maturing, simmering in me for several years. It's not like I think one Indian guru says, it takes a long time for the fruit to mature, but it takes an instant for it to to drop. Like when it's mature, when the time is right, when it's ripe, it will drop. And that's what happened as well with me. It was not, it was a process. It wasn't, from one day to the next. And the healthcare sector and all of these opportunities, right, of restructurings and change, 5 companies in 7 years. And the last assignment with Takeda, I was very clear already saying, I'm going to accept a contractor job and employment contract because I also want to see HR from all facets. As an employee, as a contractor, like my interim assignment, as a freelancer. And that allowed me as well a great turnaround of this world of work, and what it was supposed to be. So anyway, it wasn't a clear cut, like everything in the past you throw away. Not at all. So anyway, let's unpack
nice.
your questions.
It really helps to, again, you've stepped a little bit into the actions you take to come from there to here, because a lot of people think, yeah, these are two different ends of your career in terms of, you've been into corporate, now you are into PG creative spaces, and, everything in between is forgotten, but totally everything in between is what made you come here, right? So
Yes.
it's really filled and packed with action. So as you mentioned, probably you started with, you took the action of really switching from an employee to a contractor, experiencing that space with different hats, to allowing yourself to be living as a contractor, as a freelancer. What else helped you to take, or what were the next sequence of actions that you could have taken subconsciously, which got you into this day when you decided, I'm going to register my company?
So that was definitely part of it. So the wanting to experiment before taking a leap, right? So wanting to experiment and say, oh, okay, I don't think I'm not ready yet fully to step out of a world that I've been working in for 25 years. So yes, the contracting definitely helped. And then, okay, bit by bit, like it got extended. But when the time came of saying, well, why don't you actually apply for the job that you've been doing? Why don't you actually go for that job? It's like, no, I have to be true to the journey that I had already started in my mind. Not necessarily in my actions, but I had already started that journey in my mind. And before that, also, I had decided to do this master in curatorship, not because I wanted to become a curator, but because I wanted to do something different. I wanted to feed my soul, if you allow me these words, which are like big words if we talk about like business, but with other language than simply business language. I had reached the point where that language was no longer meaningful. Even if we talk about wonderful things like diversity, inclusion, and all these, but when it's institutionalized and when it's becoming like a process, when it's a ticking of a box, I just needed something different. So I had already started in 2018, by doing a master's in curatorship and being involved with people who were completely different from me and from the environment that I knew. But that started triggering and opening up, perspectives and points of view. The other one was the music. I absolutely wanted to go back to recording, to going back to a studio. And so I started working on songs for the new album. And all of this while I was employed, while I was in the middle of all these restructurings, by the way. So those were also 2 important elements, like in parallel, following me or kind of supporting me in that journey. Once again, it was not like a switch on the light, switch on, switch off. It wasn't. And were they conscious decisions? Perhaps they were. For the music, for sure. For the curatorship, it was circumstantial in the sense I knew I wanted to do something, like beef up my education, if you will, from a different perspective, which, parenthesis, that also confused people. Like, well, wait a second. Well, why do you're an HR professional, a business professional, so you have a master's in music as well, and now curatorship. Like, what's the deal here? Like, are you? And that's my point. Like, we're so used to putting people in boxes and categorizing because our brain is used to that. And I wanted to break away from that. So, and then there's
remember
nothing.
you did NLP in that duration.
Yes,
You
for
started
10
it before,
years.
but you almost kind of went into some of the other
True,
courses at that point in time again.
true. Been a lot into this neurolinguistic and the study a little bit of the brain and the language patterns and observing my own language patterns when I would be speaking with people, or my own belief systems, to what extent perhaps I wasn't taking that decision due to some limiting beliefs, or as artists, we're really very good as creatives in self-sabotage. Like, we're really, really good at that. I think everybody's good at that, but no one more than creatives. You're never good enough. Your voice is never good enough. That when you're performing, like, this is for top-notch singers who do, I don't know, Madame Butterfly, and they gotta reach that F sharp high note. Everybody in the audience is like sitting on their seats waiting for that person to screw up, because this is what we enjoy in concerts. It's like, let me see if Celine Dion can still take that high note. So it's this constant kind of like, okay, you're constantly on stage, right? Of course, when you're on stage, I mean, that's real performance, that's real feedback. And so the all of these personal development courses did help me to rationalize a little bit more, and to give a name to perhaps my fears, and to give a name to my limitations, and to work on them. And so, but then it's all about doing it. And if you do need to believe that the universe will align with you at some stage, but you need to take that decision. So having had that contracting deal, I knew there was going to be an end date, and I wanted an end date. The moment you have a date where something ends,
you have to start.
You have to start something else. But that was a wobbly process, but I knew I had to end it. I was like, even though it's tempting, so tempting economically.
Yes.
Right now we can touch on the economic aspect once again, on the status. So tempting to continue down the road that and that's a comfortable one. You're good at it, and it's kind of like safe, stable, secure. And I don't even have kids, so it's like, what do you need to be secure and safe about, Paola? It was a bit that. So here we are, end of part one of the conversation with Mona Amin. She's been a fantastic host, leading the conversation throughout, and I definitely thoroughly enjoyed it as well. So make sure you tune into part two. It'll be coming out shortly. And until then, as always, do take care.